Hey folks, what's going on? At Pruitt here. I wanted to do a video upon the request of my friend Mr. Michael Wilson. Be sure to look up Michael Wilson. He's a really good photographer. Check him out on dadsphotographer.com or just look for Dad on Instagram. But he asked that I do a video on how I create time-lapse footage that I do. And let me go ahead and preface this. Your mileage may vary. You may not do this the same way that I do, because I know the internet is full of people that have their own ways of doing things. This is how I do it. Your way may be better. Who knows? But this is how I do it, and this is what works for me at this current time. Let's take a look at what you need to do a time-lapse sequence. First, you'll need a nice steady camera. If you can't put it on a tripod, sit it somewhere where it won't move, okay? And what you're going to do is essentially take a series of shots over time. What I like to use is my DSLR. This is a Canon T5i that's being used, and I have what's called a intervalometer. Well, let me grab the intervalometer. This little remote thing, and all it is a remote shutter. You know, you can plug it into your camera and hit the button and it'll snap a picture for you without having to touch the camera physically. This helps reduce, you know, vibration and shaking when you press your shutter button. You set up an intervalometer to take shots, you know, for a specified amount of time and within specified intervals. So what I typically do is I get my camera set up as far as the focus and exposure and so forth, and depending on what the scene is, I set it up to shoot for roughly 300 shots, maybe 350 shots, and make sure that it takes a shot every 3 seconds or so, something like that. Just depends on what it is. If you're wanting to get cloud coverage moving across the scene, I find that using something like every 3 to 5 seconds is a little bit better as far as the smooth transitions and so forth. If you want to do something that shows time jumping a little bit faster, that's when you use a different interval. Instead of using every 5 seconds, you may use every 10 to 15 seconds. I've done that for some of my nighttime time lapse when I'm looking at the sky. You know, like if you want to watch stars move or watch the moon move across the sky, you don't want to shoot every 3 seconds. Turn that down to about maybe every 10 to 15 seconds. It's something that you can do either with an intervalometer, or depending on your device, it may already have software built into it that'll allow you to shoot in intervals. My camera does not do that. Smartphones can do it because you can install time-lapse applications such as Lapse Pro. I've used that several times and it does a really good job. All right, so now from the camera standpoint, you're squared away. Next, you're going to need some software. I recommend the Adobe suite. Most of the time I use Adobe Premiere Pro. That's their video editing software, but you can also use Adobe After Effects. That's another part of their video editing suite that allows you to put different effects and jazz it up and all of that stuff in it. But I don't use that very often. I have certain reasons for it, and I'll get into that when we get into this video a little bit more. So you got to have a steady camera, you got to have an interval to shoot your shots, you got to have the software to do so, to put all of this stuff together. All right, so now we're going to take a look at my screen. All right, so if you look at my screen here, I have Adobe Premiere Pro open as well as After Effects open back here. And I've already taken some photographs previously, so let me grab those and put them in the frame just for a second. All right. And this here is just about, I don't know, maybe 200, 300 shots that I grabbed a few days ago. And if you just scroll through them, you notice that they're fairly the same. Except for that one. This particular shot, I somehow got down in front of the camera. I don't know what the heck I was doing. So we're just gonna get rid of that for now. Please and thank you. All right. So that's all of the shots that we're gonna be playing with to create the time lapse this go around. All right. So we'll close this, or we'll just move it out of the way, and we'll go into, let's use Premiere Pro to start with. All right. So we'll go into Premiere Pro and start up a new project. I use a video template that I just decided to make for myself. It sort of helps me with creating my videos, especially with my vlog. It just sort of speeds up my workflow. So when I open up Premiere Pro, I have this little screen here that says video template, and I just click that and it'll load up and it's ready to go with all of my settings. All right. So the first thing you want to do is import all of those photographs that you snapped. So I'll double click here to import the photographs. I have them saved somewhere over here. Right there. This is the demo folder. Now, if you do like a select all right here, you'll open these images. Well, I'm not going to select them all, but let's say we're just selecting a small group of them. You'll open these images and they'll pop up down here in your project panel as 4 different images because that's what you selected. Sadly, that does no good for you. So even if I were to drag them over into this timeline, they just play as stills. See, nothing really happened there. So what you need to do is import these as a sequence. So I'm just going to undo all of that. So you import them as a sequence. You go to whatever directory that your photographs are in, click on the very first one. And then you'll notice at the bottom of your Explorer window, you get this checkbox that says image sequence. So you check that, and Adobe Premiere is going to look for all of these applicable file names in a sequence, and it's going to pull them in. The second there's a delineation from that, that file pattern, file name pattern, it will not import those. So let's go ahead and pop these in. All right, so that was a couple hundred photographs, but notice the project panel only put one particular file in. That's because it's an actual sequence. So then you just drag this over to your timeline to get ready to do your actual video editing and rendering. And if you look closely, you'll see that this is about 9 seconds worth of footage. Yeah, I know that's pretty bad from all of those shots that you've taken, but fortunately inside of Premiere Pro or any other video editor, you can adjust this footage to play slower, to make it a little bit longer, or play faster to make it shorter. It's all up to you. Depends on what you're trying to do. I typically like to double check to make sure all of the sequence settings are okay, as far as like being in the right frame rates and the right aspect ratio. So I'm going to click on sequence up here, and then I'm going to go to sequence settings. All right, now this came up to 29.97 frames per second. I don't want that. I wanted it 23.976 frames per second. Now they do have these different presets up here. I can select that I shot this with a DSLR, and that's fine, but it gives me the wrong frame rate. So I want to use the typical film 23.976 frame rate. And then I also like to make sure down here that the actual viewing format is good to go. This is 1920 by 1079, which is normally 1080. Wouldn't tell too much of a difference, but yeah, see, it won't even render it properly. That's not good. All right. There we go. So now we're squared away. And if I was to scroll through here with my little pinhead, you'll see that I just have a typical time lapse of the clouds moving over this particular area. All right. Now you can mess around with some of the flow of your time lapse. You can make it pan, you can make it zoom in and zoom out, and do that all within your particular video editor. But I'm not going to worry about that just yet. Let me at least get this thing set up to something longer than 9 seconds. So what I'll do here is click on my particular sequence and right click and select speed and duration. And the nice thing about Premiere Pro, it'll tell you the current duration that you're at when it's set to 100% speed. I want this to go a little bit longer than 9 seconds, so I'm going to slow it down. And I'm thinking probably about 60% will get me the sweet spot that I want. Yeah, about 15 to 20 seconds, which is what just showed up there. But let's try 50. Okay, yeah, that should be close enough. And then I'll hit OK. and it'll think about it. And of course you see that it got longer as a file. One of the things about the performance of not only Adobe Premiere Pro but After Effects is you really need to have a beefy computer system. You need to have a good amount of RAM on your system. You need to have a really nice processor on there. Well, it don't have to be really nice, but it just has to be adequate enough to handle all of these different processes and bells and whistles that this software throws at it. If not, it's going to be insanely slow. And with that said, I'd like to take a little quick preview of, the current file. So I'll just hit play here and it'll run through. All right, now you notice it stutters a little bit, and that's because it's trying to render this huge 1080p file as a little cache preview. Okay, see, now it caught up. It did a lot better and smoothed out. A little key factor to note inside of Premiere or even After Effects is this yellow line right here. That lets you know about the rendering status. You want that to be green in most instances when you're working on it, as far as your editing and so forth, because when it's green, you'll be able to preview it a lot smoother and a lot faster. Or you can just click on this and select sequence, and you can render, and it'll go through a rendering process. If you want to wait on it, you can. So we're going to pause right here. Okay, so now it completed the render process, and you see that this line right here on the screen is green. So if I was to just tap play to preview it, it's a lot smoother. Now you see there was a slight jump or hiccup right there at the beginning of the video. And I think that's because I may have moved the tripod or something, or tapped it or something while I was standing there instead of leaving it alone. And that's what happens. Any slight movement will screw with your final output. Fortunately, if I don't want that in there, I can just move it out. Okay. So now let's see how it plays. There, much better. I shortened it just a hair, but it's okay. I think this is still a decent time lapse to go with. All right, so that's it. Once you get it, squared away and ready to go, all you have to do is export it. Let's go to File, Export Media, and a pop-up window is supposed to show up somewhere. There it is. And you put in all of your applicable settings, give it a file name, and hit Q or hit export, and it will render out your final image into an MP4 file. Make sure that you have this format set to H.264, and I typically tell it to match the source bit rate. And you can adjust all of the other settings down here as far as the audio quality and video quality. Most of the time I only touch the audio quality if I put an audio track in there. I don't think it necessarily needs to have a 320 kilobit bit rate in this thing, so I typically knock it down to like 128, something like that. I think that's good enough. But that's what happens when you square this up to be rendered. So I'll just go ahead and hit Q for now and rename this thing to something. We'll say Anderson front yard demo. All right, so once your video has been queued up and rendered through the Adobe Media Encoder, it will give you a MP4 output file. Hopefully it does anyway. So let you take a look at what came up after it was done running. So we'll pull this over here and hit play, and there's your time lapse. All right, now looking at that, yeah, it's fairly boring, but just for the demo purposes, I just wanted to show how it could be done. You could add an audio track to your time-lapse video. You can also add different effects, far as like panning and zooming in and out of the particular sequence, and you can do all of that from inside of your video editor, whether it's Adobe or Windows Movie Maker, Final Cut Pro, or what have you. You can either do those effects as you're building a time lapse, or after you have your actual time-lapse video file completed. So that's just another thing you can do to add some more I don't know, dynamics to your time lapse. So now I want to take a quick look at using Adobe After Effects to create time lapse. So I'm just going to minimize and we'll jump into After Effects. Okay, with After Effects, it's pretty much the same process. You grab those still images that you snapped from your camera previously and you import them in. The difference here is After Effects allows you to import camera raw photo files. You don't have to have a JPEG or anything like that. It can be a TIFF file, or it can be just a whatever your camera's proprietary camera raw file is. And so what I'm going to do is import some footage that I shot here previously or recently, and these were shot in camera raw. When you're using camera raw, you have to understand that you're getting a lot more data on these files, so they're going to be huge, humongous files. So, and that's a good thing when it comes to editing the actual photographs, because it allows you to have some leeway with your editing style, you know, and keeps them looking nice and crisp and clean. But it's still the same fundamentals. You go and import the file, and you want to do it as a sequence. Notice I just clicked the very first one here, and I have this box here that says a sequence. Click import. It's going to think, and it'll pull up this little editor file here. If I wanted to go in and make some adjustments on it, I could, and it would paste those adjustments to all of the files in that sequence, but I'm not doing any of that. So I'm just going to hit OK. All right. So you get one little file right here inside of After Effects instead of a gazillion image files there. So next, I like to make sure the settings are fine for those image files, and I like to go to Interpret Footage, and then you select Main. All right, so we're looking at the frame rate. Remember, the frame rate was 23.9 or something like that. Was it 967? For these things, I think that makes it a lot smoother. It gives you a good 24p film view, if you will. Everything else seems to be okay, so you just click OK there, and inside of After Effects you drag this down to your composition like that, and that sticks it down in a timeline similar to how Adobe Premiere looks. All right, so notice it loaded it up, and my image is huge on this screen. Shouldn't be that big. So you just click here on this little triangle, and you want to transform this image by changing the scale on it. But let's not do that just yet. Let's make sure the sequence settings are fine. The sequence settings could be wrong. So we'll go to composition settings, and yeah, these sequence settings are not quite right. So we like to change this to HDTV 24. All right, so now we got it at 1920 by 1080, 24 frames per second. Hit OK. All right, so that's still a little bit too big. So we'll go down here to the scale and shrink it down a little bit, because our picture is way too big for our canvas. All right, so that's good right about there. All right, and after that, that's pretty much it. You can just do the same thing and export it, and it will export this out as a nice little time lapse of the city going through here. The only difference here is the previewing that you were doing inside of Adobe Premiere is a lot faster than doing the previews inside of After Effects, because you're using those really large camera raw files, and your computer really has to churn and churn to process that data. A tip on that, and that's for all of the Creative Cloud Suites applications, is you go into the preference menu. All right, and you have all these different options here, and you can manage how your memory is being utilized by the different applications in the Creative Cloud Suite. You notice I have 16 gigs of installed RAM, but you know, I'm only using seven gigs for After Effects, and I think Premiere is probably using 6 or something like that. Either way, you can allocate all of that to your liking, you know, to figure out what's the best performance on your computer. So I'll cancel that because mine is already set. But yeah, it's done. If I want to do a RAM preview, I'll just click this little play button here, and it's going to try to render it out. Notice the little green line. It's thinking. It's going to take a while. So I won't bore you with that. So I'll just hit pause, and I'll just scrub and let you see what it actually did, which isn't much. But either way, it's pretty. And again, similar to the previous time-lapse video, you can drop that inside of another video editor and work on the panning and zooming. You can do some of that inside of After Effects. It's a little bit easier for me to do it inside of Premiere, but if you want to try it in After Effects, have at it. All right, so that is it, Mr. Michael Wilson. I hope this is helpful for you. I know you have time-lapse capabilities built into your camera already, but you know, your mileage may vary. You can try it out on your camera and just see what it does as far as the output file, and maybe dump it inside of Premiere or After Effects and just go from there. Be sure to click like and subscribe and share, and I thank you all for watching.